Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. There are many, many words that have been used to describe where college athletics and higher education is at this moment in time. The wild, wild west is one often used. Out of control is another frequently used term, and the list goes on. One word that doesn't get as much use in these conversations is disruption. College athletics is in full disruption mode. From media rights to conference realignment to revenue sharing with athletes, none of this right now feels or looks stable. It's the good thing then that we have an expert with us today who spends most of his waking hours thinking about disruption. Michael Horn is the co-founder of and a distinguished fellow at the Clayton Christensen Institute for Disruptive Innovation, a nonprofit think tank, and he also teaches at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. He also co-hosts the top education podcast, Future You, and Class Disrupted. Michael, welcome to my podcast.
I'm glad to be joining your podcast. I feel like I'm coming on way turf, if you will, but we're going to have a fun conversation. Hopefully your fans will embrace me.
I think we will. I mean, I just think you have such a unique perspective that I was dying to have you share it with my listeners. So this is a perfect time to have this discussion with you. You're a college sports fan. How does this generally look to you at the moment as a college sports fan?
Chaotic, right? Because you feel like the rules of the game are literally being changed underneath you. Any individual decision, Karen, I feel like it makes sense to you at some level. And then yet the overall fabric or tapestry of what we have known and what we're moving toward feels so different that I think the fallout of it, when we get to the other side, it's intermingled with this much larger, frankly, story of higher ed transformation that we're in the midst of right now.
Yeah.
That I think people tend to see them as two different things. I don't think they are. I think they're actually really part of a sector that is dramatically turning over or being disrupted right now.
I couldn't agree more. And when I say that to people, sometimes they look at me like I have three heads. They say, wait a minute, they're very separate. No. This isn't unique to this moment in time. This is what's been happening. And of course, we could equate it to the world and we have all kinds of things going on in the Middle East right now, but it just feels like it's that moment in time. So I want to play a little game with you.
Okay.
I'm going to say a crazy part of the college sports ecosphere that is currently upside down as of today. And you offer a parallel disruptive event in the world of business and innovation. So let's start with this. Paying athletes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I think paying athletes, I think this is literally, so when disruptive innovations come about, and when I say this, I generally mean innovations that the leaders just completely discount, they overlook, they think those things will never be good enough, but they bring affordability, accessibility, convenience, and so forth and change the market. Fundamentally changes the rules of the game. To me, paying athletes is that, right? It's fundamentally changing the rules of the game. And it's almost like, back in the day, we had mini computers which were large machines, and like all the engineers were like, how can we make it more powerful? And then Steve Jobs comes along with this little personal computer, small, it's like a toy for hobbyists and children. And it literally changes the world completely and turns upside down. And I think the equivalent, frankly, look, this is still the NIL world to some degree, but Indiana University winning a national championship in football, what? Is literally changing the rules of the game completely.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I have to give a shout out to the University of Pennsylvania, the founder and original place for the very first supercomputer. So there you go.
There you go.
Okay, here we go. Secondly, $10 million football coaches.
Okay, this is interesting because to me, what this feels like is the dying breaths of the way that things have been done. So what I will tell you is in industries that are disrupted, you tend to see a lot of consolidation at the end. There's certain winners that like sort of they buy up a lot of the firms, and you get these very high priced CEOs getting paid a lot of money. They're sort of the winners, if you will, of that game. And by the way, a few of them probably win into the future. Like there's room for a few of those, right? But a lot of those that are trying to keep up with the Joneses, if you will, I'm going to pay mine, I'm going to pay mine. There's a limit to how far that goes, often in the dying stages of the old way of doing things.
I really like that analogy. When I think of a winner, I think of Nick Saban because he's continued to be relevant, be well beyond his coaching years. People value his perspective. They're asking him to be on, think tank committees. He's going to be in the White House on Friday with
Is he really?
President Trump's Save College Sports meeting. So I think of that. But if you were to name somebody who coached at University of Maryland 10 years ago, I'm not sure I would have remembered that. I mean, I think there are certain people who rise
I think
above.
I think that's a great analogy, right? You look at a place like University of Maryland, Gary Williams back in like the
Yes.
early 2000s, that was sort of the peak of the program. And then they've had a series of,
Yeah.
right? And because the price of keeping up with that is really, really hard. That is a game only a few can win.
That's really true. Okay, my third offer is women's sports as an undervalued asset.
Ooh, I love this one. Okay, so I'm going to tell you this. Every single disruptive innovation that comes along is completely undervalued and discounted because, so I'll take you into like a lot of investors' heads. When they see a disruptive innovation, it's literally creating a new market in many cases, right? It's tackling where there's never been anything before. And so people will invariably say, well, what's the market size? It's unknowable because it has not existed before. Like you take that personal computer example, though, McKinsey was like, everyone's going to own a computer? What? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Completely undervalued. So much so, Clay Christensen, my late mentor, did this calculation at some point around disruptive innovations. And I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it was something like even an asset like Netflix. And this was like, when were we doing this? Around 2010. So 16 years ago, Netflix was already huge, right? Even then, he said the discount rate that the market does not understand its upside growth because of its disruptive trajectory was some huge amount. And he calculated that it was significantly undervalued. And so he was like, that's an asset I'm going to buy and I'm going to hold because watch it grow into its valuation. And indeed it has. I think when you talk about undervaluing of certain women's sports, probably what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that's why we've seen so many athletes, male and female, use some of their earnings and investing it in women's sports because there's just simply easier access right now professionally, but
Oh, and
also
stay on it.
it's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and look at like Serena Williams's husband, right? Who we all know from founding Reddit and so forth, and investing. And he says, "Look, like undervalued asset, people aren't going there. That's when, but there, we see the demand. You look at who shows up at the University of Nebraska volleyball women's games, right? They outdraw. Look at the explosion of WNBA growth and interest in women's college basketball, right? It's like it's a totally different landscape, and as a result, that's a place to invest."
That's great. All right, my last offer is the transfer portal. This is driving coaches crazy. What do you think about innovation
And I
here?
understand why. And as a fan, it's hard as well because the switching is. I mean, the one and done was tough enough, and now you got the transfer portal.
Yeah.
But in some ways, it's the end of non competes in places like California. So you think about a lot of the innovation that drove that, right? And there was all these lock-ins where people, couldn't just switch companies and things of that nature. Ending the non-compete meant you couldn't legally hold people, say, you can't go to a competitor within a certain amount of months. And California is famous, for not having non-competes, which really, I think, allowed for a lot of fluidity across different companies and competitors. And I think really helped the innovation diffuse and so forth across that landscape. So that's the one that outside of sports feels like the clearest analogy. Obviously, you can go back to, the advent of free agency in Major League Baseball and things of that nature if you wanted to go in professional sports. But I think from a business standpoint, ending non-competes is the closest analogy.
That's interesting. Okay. So just looking at the framing we've done with those four things, try to help us understand where college athletics sits now in the disruption space. And then we'll talk about the innovation space.
Yeah, let's do it. So I think of it as part of our overall conversation. And let me maybe not do disruption first and talk about maybe the collapse of the business models first, and then let's talk about disruption against that backdrop. And the only reason I say that is this is the world that is confronting college right now, which is the demographics. We hit peak high school graduation last year. Many regions have had actually falling numbers of high school graduates for many years now, but we're literally, and people don't like when people like me say cliff, but it's it's a cliff in that it
Which,
does
yeah,
not rebound as far as the eye can see. Through at least 2045, higher ed is going to be in a world of shrinking numbers of what has been, and for athletics in particular, what has been its prime age demographic, which is that 18 to 22, 24-year old, if you're looking at Indiana University football,
yeah,
people, right? And so this doesn't change anytime soon. So that's number one. Number two, the costs underlying all parts of college have consistently gone up and up and up. And that's certainly true in athletics, right? The cost of competing has gone up significantly. You reference those head coach contracts, but it's not just the head coaches, right? It's a lot of parts of their staff as well.
yes, and their staffs have get bigger, yes, absolutely.
Exactly. They're getting bigger and the compensation is going up, right? Both things are true. And that is true across all colleges and universities. And so you have fewer numbers of people able to pay what are rising cost structures fundamentally, and it just doesn't add up. And so you also look at net, everyone loves to look at list tuition, how it's gone up over time, but actually net tuition has been relatively flat to maybe even declining over the last many numbers of years. So that's less revenue coming in effectively to support an increasing cost base with less possible paying individuals. That ain't a good recipe, right? And so that is the larger context in which the sports game of college sports is being played. And I start there because then you have one other factor, which is the disruptive innovation piece. But maybe we're setting the tone of the disruption, if you will, which is there are new forms of college coming in, right? Southern New Hampshire Online, Western Governors University, Liberty, even that fields a sports team, or Grand
Yes,
Canyon, right? Like new forms, largely online at this point, although not exclusively, that are dramatically lower costs, really focused on teaching and learning, often non traditional students, and are very much changing the game. And by the way, we haven't yet seen a lot of AI native universities, but I don't know where this is going to go.
right,
So
right.
that's sort of the landscape, I guess, in which we are. And then let's talk about the sports aspect of it, which you know way better than I do. But my perception of it is we're adding a lot more cost
Mm,
on to be competitive in sports right now in the
yes,
deep level.
yes,
And so that's already over leveraged, if you will, business models that are already sort of on thin ice.
mhm,
And for schools at the D3 level, really, that are maybe D2, but largely D3 level, that are struggling to attract students, sports has been the way that they have done it. But it is a very, that's I don't even know if it's a double edged sword. It's just a sword in the
yeah,
sense that, like, yeah, you may be able to get enrollment up for a given year, but it changes the culture of your school. It actually may hurt your net tuition profile
yeah,
because you're taking a lot more students that are quote unquote scholarshiped, but are paying less, and they think that they're being given the opportunity to play. And then they find out that they're the 135th member on the football team,
yeah,
or the eighth second baseman, or whatever it is. That is not going to, that doesn't play well for that school's reputation that was already struggling to keep students in this environment we just described. Sports becomes sort of the tip of the spear, if you will, of a college that may be declining. And so I think at both levels, whether it's sort of the professionalization side of it that's increasing the costs, or the other side where it's been seen as a savior for a school, it is playing a very perilous role in sort of this larger disruption, if you will, that we're seeing right now.
those are such good points, and you go back, you talk about tuition discounting, which is what I call it, when we try to make the price acceptable to the families that we want to attract. And I really worry about this because small tuition-dependent schools are discounting it 55%, 56%. And then yet you've still got to absorb the costs of athletics going up. And they're not just going up because we're paying Division III coaches $1 million a year. Travel goes up, the cost of uniforms and equipment goes up. There's more technology coming into the game. You need more medical staff to take care of the size of the teams, all of those things. So, what people often say is athletics doesn't have a revenue problem, it has a spending problem. How do we think about this in an era of disruption that we have to think about spending differently?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And so a couple thoughts. One, I think there's some subset, right, of the current schools. Like we were talking about the $10 million football coaches in the game. And I said, look, there's always a few folks that do survive that arms race and kind of stay with the legacy models into the future, right? It's not like everyone gets obliterated. And my guess is, and you would tell me the exact number, but my guess is, something like what, 50 or 60 FBS schools at max probably can play the game that is developing of the professionalization of sports. And frankly, they may spin out certain of their sports teams into sort of affiliated for profit models, I would guess, in the future. We'll see what that looks like. I think that's going to raise even more questions, frankly. But like you can imagine that that's one track, I guess, of this. And potentially having two different balance sheets will all of a sudden cause those affiliates, if you will, to look into different ways of doing things and stuff of that nature. They'll certainly change the revenue side of it, I would think. Now, the challenge to your point is that the arms race on the technology facilities, travel
Yes,
costs, especially when
travel.
you have bigger leagues that make no geographic sense, like,
Um,
this is going to be, there's not a lot of schools that can play that game.
yeah.
I think for the broad swath of higher ed that, as you accurately said, is in this net tuition discounting world and is struggling as it is, I think this is where you've got to figure out how do we use innovations that allow us to do something more affordably, but good enough, right? As opposed to trying to keep up with the old rules of the game. We've got to figure out, how do you use, I'm going to give a really bad example, but like the HyperIce technology instead of having the 3 massage trainers, right, on the team, right? Or,
Okay.
right, like
Yeah.
how do we find disrupt or the wearable technologies, right, to monitor health? And maybe that's more affordable. How do we disrupt within our existing operation? But I think the other thing is probably going to be some conscious choices to lean into the club or amateurization, if you will, of sports and more think about sports as a place where we create community that is critical for
Mhm.
the educational experience. Because I think you and I both believe sports plays like an incredibly important, larger meta role in society that is sometimes missed when people are like, oh, really? You're looking at the football game again? It's more about how it brings people together and sort of we need more of that in our society at the moment,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like bringing people together across political difference and everything. Like sports has a huge role to play on campuses. It has a huge role in networking and getting jobs and justifying the ROI and bringing alumni communities back and all those things. But it might not be through the paradigm that we've been playing, right? Like, I think it's going to require a fundamental shift of we're not playing the varsity game anymore. We're all going more of what looks like a club or almost intramural sort of profile almost. I think you can have competing against schools. So maybe club is the better analogy. But that's sort of my gut instinct is that there is like a low end, if you will, to use the disruption metaphor place to occupy. And I'll give you one example. I was talking to a president of a community college recently, and he was like, I'm going to start up a sports program. It's like, you're going to what? And he was like, well, I'm only going to start it up if I can get each sport fully endowed from the get go. And like I can spend it and only 5% out of that bucket.
Wow, that's a lot of
And
money.
so, right, right. But he was like, but I'm only doing it at a club, very local level. I'm not trying to travel across states. I'm not trying, right? Like he put all these bounds around it that he said, like, I think I can make this work for maybe $5 million, maybe not football, but $5 million
Yeah.
for a lot of the other sports. He's like, I think I can make this work. And by the way, like I have access to sports fields through the community, like town ownership. That's not me,
Okay.
right? I was like, huh, okay. So basically, you're providing a way for people to continue to play, for community to come together, you are going to try to explicitly avoid the cost problem by having it all spoken for up front. And you're not going to launch unless you have that, right? And you've put some clear bounds around it. That could be interesting, right?
Yeah,
Like, I do think that that could be very interesting, but it's a very different model. And it really, to your point, disrupts the existing paradigm of how we've thought about college sports.
I like that example. There's a small college outside Philadelphia that dropped its athletics program at Division III. They just dropped it. And now what I think they're doing is leasing out their wonderful fields to the community. So they've used their fields now as a revenue driver for
As a
the rest
revenue
of the
driven.
campus,
Oh, that's
which
great.
is, you know, but you're thinking outside the box here. And the thing that I wonder about presidents as they're trying to really wrestle with the costs in this is the perception of prestige in athletics carries so much weight, not only with your students, hey, we won the game today, but also what peer group you affiliate with. You look at the NESCAC schools, for example, those are elite Division III schools. And I can't think of a Division III school that would not want to be a part of that conference. So they would want to position themselves if they were ever to be invited to get an invitation. So, how do you do this? How do you reconcile this idea of prestige and mind, body, spirit that we always talked about with college, and this idea of reframing athletics?
It's a great question because I think the bigger challenge that higher ed has in all this that undergirds everything I said at the front around disruption is that every institution almost is playing the prestige game across. And that's why the cost structures have gone up across everything, right? Which is if I don't pay the faculty of this department enough, right? Or if I don't update their lab technology or I don't do this, I'm going to fall off on the prestige thing, right? And
Yes.
so, I always say like when Harvard Business School adds a swimming pool, you better believe Stanford GSB does, right? And that's true across peer groups and higher.
That's probably true.
And so the challenge, I think, is how do you get out of that prestige mindset? And I think it's tricky. You got to change. I mean, it goes to the question you were asked originally, where with paying athletes in the game, and I said, well, mini computer to personal computer, all of a sudden, where large was good before, all of a sudden small was right, and where
Yes.
like most complicated engineering problem to stupid simple enough that a kid could use it, like that's a dramatic shift of how we think about performance. And institutions that do this well, I think will make that leap. Just as an example, like Southern New Hampshire University, right? When they launched their online program, all of a sudden the question was like, can we take any student regardless of background essentially, right, and get them into a great job? And all of a sudden admissions was like measured in minutes as opposed to months, right? And all these changes that came out of it, I think Arizona State has made a shift, not in its athletic program, but in the rest of its university on that dimension as well, right? So those are big changes that require you to have a business model that works around that. And I think that maybe the biggest nut to crack on that, and I don't know the answer, maybe you do. I was reading an article on Southern New Hampshire online recently in the Washington Post, and they said, "Oh, can you believe they spend 14% of their budget on marketing?" And most campuses don't. And I was thinking, the heck that they don't. University of Alabama's sports budget is 260 million or something.
Exactly.
You're telling me that's not marketing?
Yeah.
Of
And
course it
that's the
is.
way that's the way it's always pitched to the faculty, right?
Right.
Well, this is such a great branding and it's awareness, and we get all this earned media and attention on Saturdays. There's just, the it rolls off their tongue how fast they can identify why it's a good thing. But when you
Yeah. And
have
so I don't
these
know how you break that, right?
Yeah,
Because the prestige game is how you attract students. And I think you just have to, I guess maybe this is the answer, which is the examples we gave around Arizona State or Southern New Hampshire, whomever. They had a very clear mission driven conversation across the entire university around, we don't want to play that game anymore. This is what we're going to be known for. And so it's like, it's not just like, this is our mission. It's like, this is what we're not doing. Right. And I think you have to do the same thing maybe, but I don't think sports can be like its own island of that. I think it has to be integrated with the larger conversation at the university, probably of like, this is the game we're playing. This is how sports fits into it in a coherent way. And they have to work together because otherwise, if like to your point, I think you're putting your finger on the right thing. Like if the university is still playing the prestige game and you all of a sudden decided not to in the sports, that probably won't work for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that there's no doubt that prestige game, because people talk about where you are in the rankings. Where's your school? Where's your college? Where are your teams? Everything's about rankings and postseason and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Can you think of an example in the business world where this kind of tension exists, where it's really important to be in, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal as thought leaders versus we're just going to do a really good job and be really good at these things and maybe not care about the Wall Street Journal?
That's such a good question. The companies that I think do the best at that are those that never intend to go public.
Okay.
They intend to be, my friend Dave Wharton, he calls them evergreen companies, and they want to be like family owned and private for like generation to generation. And they have like a very, like, they're playing 100-year game and you're playing a quarter to quarter game.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So they're able to invest in employees, weather tough times, not lay them off, like play a loyalty, like a whole bunch of values based things that they're able to do differently because the timeline over which they're playing is so different that they don't get sucked into it. And to your point, the CEO is like, I don't care if I'm on the Wall Street Journal. I'm just going to keep doing my, head down, get my bucket, do my thing. Right.
Yes.
So I think that's maybe one example. The other thing that I thought you were going to ask is like how a company changes in the business world and like also does this new game. And the only thing we've ever seen that works is when they set up basically an independent subsidiary, if you will, or a separate team that has the freedom to rethink all these questions around value proposition and prestige and processes and resources. Like it has total freedom to draw a new blank canvas. That's what Southern New Hampshire University did when they did the online division, right? It's what
Okay.
in the examples in the business world, that they're legendary, the ones that did it. But I'll pick one from the world of department stores. There used to be 300 plus full service department stores in the chains in this country. There's like 6 or something left, I think, if you count Macy's, which is on life support, I think.
Right.
But one of the ones that survived was this company called Dayton Hudson, which was in the
Yeah.
Wisconsin, Minnesota area.
Just
And they did so because they launched this thing in 1962 called Target. And Target just, was part of the discount retail wave of Target, Walmart, and Kmart and disrupted the world. Now, they didn't really do it correctly, I think, with Target.com, but Amazon, ate their lunch there. But the point is like that principle of freedom to reinvent. And so the reason I mention it is you could imagine a school sort of understanding that this game of prestige in sports was time limited, but they're going to sort of play it out until it doesn't have any more to play.
yeah. Yeah.
But they're perhaps launching, whether it's a new school, whether it's a new independent sort of, athletic program that will be there when they sunset the exist. I don't know what it looks like, but I guess you could imagine that logic is something that they could deploy as well. The last example I'll give you is this, that we found helps people be impervious to this stuff, which is, we have this concept from our research known as the job to be done, which is when you're so clear on what the value proposition is you're delivering for your users and what progress for them looks like, not for you, but for them. You can optimize everything around them and swap things in and out and so forth. And there's one company, IKEA, that I think has done an incredible job of just knowing its job to be done and staying in its lane. It hasn't been allured by the upmarket, heirloom furniture. Like you go in there today, it's still pretty cheap furniture, but
And you're
the
still putting
job
it
to be done.
there. You're
Yeah,
still
right, and you still put it
putting it
together
away.
because the
That's
job
right.
to be done is fundamentally, I'm moving into a new apartment and I have to furnish this thing this weekend because I start school or work on Monday, right? Like that's fundamentally the job to be done. And so, the various online furniture retail things that have come up, Wayfair, et cetera, the various discount furniture stuff hasn't disrupted them, nor have they been allured to play that prestige game of going up market to higher end furniture and stuff. They just stayed in their lane. We just help you furnish it tomorrow. And so we lay out the store based on the rooms. We make it easy to bring home and put together. The directions are the clearest of anywhere. It's not meant to survive for 15 years. That's not the purpose of it, right? On and on. Like every design decision is built around that. And they've been great. And so I do think that you could imagine a college gets super clear around its job to be done and how sports fits coherently into that, and just says like we're done being all things to all people. We're going to focus on whatever it is. In some ways, Northeastern did this with co-ops, right?
Right.
And that's what we do, right? We're just going to nail that. You sort of become known for that job to be done. And students who are genuinely looking for that experience start looking for you, and they're delighted to pay maybe premium prices because you're nailing that job to be done. And you're not trying to serve someone else who has like, the prestige game or something completely different in their head.
Those are very interesting analogies. My head's kind of running through this, but I guess if I'm a president thinking to myself, okay, where could we do this? Where could we just swim in our lane and be really, really good in the world of competition? And let's think of it as physical competition, like team or individual, that type of thing. How should they take the next step? Well, how should they think about this in relation to their campus?
Yeah, I think I would spend a little bit of time with those whom they serve, and that would be the current students that have chosen to enroll and play, the people that pay and show up for athletics, and the alumni that maybe continue to follow and support and donate and so forth. I think that's what I would think of as the stakeholders that are quote unquote hiring, right? The program. And I think I would do some interviews of them just to like tell me about the story of when you showed up at last week's volleyball game. Okay, like when did you decide you were going to enroll or buy a ticket, right? And what like literally sketch the story. And I would probably do, 10 interviews of each of those groups. I don't think you need to do more than that. My guess is you're going to hear 1 to 2 common archetype stories, and it's going to sort of tell you what your lane is and what people are really competing against. You might find out that you're not competing against, the big, to use your Philadelphia, the Big Five basketball tournament,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah. Right.
you might be competing against the high school Friday night football game, or you might be competing against something that's not even sports in nature, right? Like an art show. I don't know, right? I don't know what you'd find, but my guess is like you'd get sort of super clear pretty quickly of, wow, the three things that they always seem to be talking about are this, and that seems to be really important. Is there another way to do that? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and sort of start to center on that.
What's my lane, right? Or where's it?
Yeah,
So the lane might be different today than it was even 10 years ago
totally agree.
because of the enrollment shift and the whole idea of 2045 being the next time we see any growth in the 18 to 22-year-old sector. Michael, this has been terrific. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask you to put on your crystal ball hat. If you were looking at athletics 5 years from now, what do you think it looks like?
I think it might be sort of, I think you're going to have a class of it that is professional and is sort of maybe disruptive to the professional sports leagues, frankly, that we have in the US. And I think that's going to be a very interesting antitrust battleground
Yes.
in this country. And then I suspect you're going to have a bunch of schools that have either been driven to like a financial breaking point by their athletics or have voluntarily, to your point, dropped out of the arms race.
Yeah.
And that's the group, the latter is the group that voluntarily drops out, that I think will actually reinvent what this looks like in a more sustainable way forward. And that's the group that I'm super curious to see what they put back in its place.
I could not agree more. If I had picked the exact same anything, I would have picked those 3 things as well.
Wow.
So,
Okay. That
we're
makes
on
me feel good because you're the expert.
you nailed it, you nailed it. Michael, thank you so much for joining me and, giving our listeners something to think about because we are in a very much an age of innovation. So the best thing that we can do is try to think about the innovation, and as I say to some folks, skate to where the puck is heading.
Well said.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.